Good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for being a bit later, as in later on in the day. I just get around to getting in touch with Mill Billy and the doctor, and see about getting a live chat going with them. Let me just make sure everything is working as it should do. Yeah, as it should do. To the odd one or two people that seem to take issue with the background noise, there's nothing I can do about that. The microphones work fine. It's just StreamYard. When I was talking, as you'll notice, the background noise dissipates, but there is nothing that I can control about whatsoever. So please don't keep telling me that the audio is bad. There's nothing I can do about that. It's simply the nature of StreamYard. As you'll probably noticed, if you check out any of my music videos, you won't note that kind of noise because, as I say, it's nothing to do with me. So please don't keep telling me about it. It's out of my control. And as I say, let me check that bit again. As I say, it's nothing to do with me. So please don't keep telling me about it. As I say, it works perfectly fine when the volume goes up. Yeah, exactly, Sean. No, I don't quite know what the solution is. Certainly, if you go to some of the early Dude videos, you will notice there's extreme noise. But that's just the nature of doing live videos. It's like, if Eunice classes about upstairs in the kitchen, then I get to hear it down here, and so will you. If the doorbell rings, so will you hear it. And if the phone rings, you'll hear it. There's nothing to do about that. I'm just in my music room. I've just got a simple laptop, StreamYard, and the microphones, the little microphones that I've got set up. So, I'm jealous of everybody that's got their fancy studios. No, because I never intended to do more than one of these. And on Saturday, when I did the chat with Dassey, that was my 1000th YouTube video. Overall, though, and I had done one or two YouTube videos before, just making a murder. So anyway, if you want to moan about the sound, I'm not bothered. Okay, I'm not here for the fun of it. I simply want to share some information with people. You'll never ever hear me ask anybody to, as one or two other people did, please hit the like button and please subscribe. No, if you want to hit the like button, that's fine. If you don't, that's fine. If you want to hit the dislike button, doesn't bother me. I'll say, it's just wanting to share bits of information that I've managed to find out. And having had that chat on Saturday morning, early Saturday morning, with Tracy Keogh, looking at specifically the first part of the interview of Brendan Dassey at Michelle High School on the 27th of February 2006, which is discussed in this testimony by Richard Leo. I thought, the most obvious thing to do would be to look at what Richard Leo did actually say at Brendan Dassey's post-conviction hearing. So let's have a look at it straight away, and we won't go on about sound and microphones and all that kind of stuff. I mean, at least I didn't go singing "God Save the Queen." Now, where are we? Just here. So this is the interesting thing. This is day 2 of the hearing, but this is actually dated January the 19th. So almost 11 years ago to the day that this second day occurred. Strange enough, day 1 is listed as the 15th of January. So I don't know quite what happened to the other days, but anyway, that's what we've got. We've got the January the 19th, so almost exactly, as I say, 11 years ago. And this is, as I say, is day number 2. And if I go forward to page 87, hopefully we will get the beginning of Richard Leo's testimony. It's a long testimony. This will definitely be in several parts, and really the first part is only concerned with the credentials of Richard Leo. Again, when you hear Kathleen Zellner talking about Judge Hamilton saying, we are not here, we are not interested in best scholarly practices, and you think, why not use the expertise of people like Richard Leo? Anyway, let's carry on. So, Dr. Leo, would you please take a stand? I think he's professor now, but maybe back then he was just a doctor. Anyway, come on up here, please. Just remain standing. The clerk, or the clerk as they say in America, but we say clerk, will administer the oath. After that, please be seated. And the clerk says, please raise your right hand, Richard Leo. Called as a witness hearing, having been first duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows. Please be seated. Please state your name and spell your name for the record. And it's actually Richard Angelo Leo. My last name is spelled L-E-O. So this is the direct examination by Steve Drizzen. Dr. Leo, just to sort of catch you up to speed, you're surrounded by a number of binders from 1. They're labeled 1 through 5. And at various points in time, I may ask you to look at exhibits in these binders. So you're going to have to go open the binder to those exhibits. Well, obviously expecting to be a long time. Could I get some water? And the court. That's Judge John Fox, as I say. I think you can do that. So anyway, at this time, Dr. Leo, I'd ask you to look at exhibits 100 to 316. Exhibit 100 is in the 3rd binder. Exhibit number 316, I believe, is in the 5th binder. Okay, so I have a binder marked number 1 and a binder look number 5 behind you. Okay, can you tell me again what's in 3, what's in 5? So Steve carries on. Exhibit number 100 is in binder number 3. It's the first document, and exhibit number 316 is in the binder number 5. Okay. I'd like you to take a look at exhibit number 1. Do you recognize 100? Do you recognize this document? Yes. And what is this? Richard replies, this is my curriculum vitae, dated December 2009. Curriculum vitae is a fancy word for a resume. Would it assist you to be able to refer to this document, perhaps, in the beginning part of our testimony? Sure. Interesting, the use of our, because, of course, Steve Drizzen and Richard Leo wrote that article, 125 Proven Wrongful Confessions. Any objection, counsel? Fallon, no. Drizzen carries on, okay. Dr. Leo, where are you currently employed? Answer, the University of San Francisco School of Law, where I'm a professor. Okay, so he was already a professor. And what is your position there? I am an associate professor of law. Okay. And are you currently teaching any courses at the University of San Francisco? Yes, I am. My regular teaching responsibilities currently include criminal law, criminal procedure, and a seminar on the wrongful conviction of the innocent, the last two of which I'm teaching this semester. Okay, can you tell the court briefly about your academic training and the degrees that you hold? Sure, well, I have 4 degrees, a bachelor's and master's in sociology, and then a PhD and a JD. My PhD is in a interdisciplinary social science and law program at UC Berkeley, where you can specialize in any of the social sciences as they apply to the study of law and legal institutions. And in my case, I specialized in criminology and social psychology. I got both of my degrees in 1994. The second part of your question, in terms of my specialization, the PhD is a research degree, and you take classes and exams and ultimately do a research project. So my specialization, like anyone's specialization who gets PhD in any field, is general in that I have to master certain disciplines: criminology, social psychology, sociology, and law. But it's also specific. And so researchers who are not generalists develop specific areas of research specialization. In my case, it's been the study of police interrogation, the psychology of interrogation, coercive interrogation, false confessions, and the wrongful conviction of the innocent. And in my career, research career, going back to the early 1990s, when I was a graduate student, I published and researched and published extensively in these areas. Steve carries on, okay, would it be fair to say that concerning your testimony here today, the most relevant experience that you have, the most relevant training that you have and expertise is in the social psychology of police interrogations and how psychological interrogation tactics can produce coerced and unreliable confessions? Answer, yes. Okay, let's break in some of these terms. When you say the social psychology of police interrogations, what do you mean? What I mean is that the interrogation is a process. Now, social psychologists are interested, it's a psychological process. Social psychologists are interested in generally how people's perceptions are influenced or shaped by those around them, and how and why they decide to do what they do, act the way that they act. So a social psychologist studying the interrogation process is interested in how the influences in interrogation cause a suspect to behave the way they do, namely, usually stop denying and ultimately start admitting. What is it about the environment of interrogation? What is it about the techniques of interrogation which police are to use? What it is about the process that causes a suspect to change his or her behavior and ultimately stop denying and start admitting to something that is against their self-interest and can land them in prison for many years. Steve, okay, you mentioned the words psychological interrogation tactics. What do you mean by those words? Answer. So going back to the 1940s, police have developed a psychology of interrogation. They have developed training manuals on how to break suspects down and get confessions. Police realize this is the premise of their manuals and their training, that most people are not going to make admissions at the beginning of an interpretation. And so you've got to use techniques or methods to break down their resistance and move them from denial to admission. And so these, when I say psychological techniques, I mean techniques that they write about in their manuals, that they train interrogators, detectives to use during interrogation, that social scientists like myself and many others have studied for a long time. Okay, and when you use the words as we are going to use today throughout your questioning psychological coercion. What do you mean when you use those? Well, I mean one of two things. Either techniques recognized in the psychological community as being inherently coercive, by their very nature, they are likely to overwhelm or overbear somebody. Techniques like deprivations, physical or psychological deprivation, but more commonly threats or promises, whether implied or expressed. So certain techniques are inherently psychologically coercive. And then a broader view of psychological coercion, because ultimately psychological coercion is about breaking down somebody's will to the point where they will do or say anything that they're directed to do. Looking cumulatively at the interrogation process, not just at a particular technique, and analysing whether or not the interrogation process caused the suspect to perceive that they had no choice but to do what they were directed or told to do. That perception of no choice is the result of psychological coercion. And the last term I want you to define, because we're going to be using it throughout, is the term unreliable confession. What do you mean by an unreliable confession? Answer: well, what I mean by an unreliable confession is a confession that doesn't fit the evidence, that's not corroborated, that there is no reason to believe is accurate. Okay. Now, you have done research yourself into the social psychology of police interrogations. Answer: yes, I've done extensive research on this topic. Question: was this a topic of your doctoral dissertation? Answer: yes, although my doctoral dissertation was really a study of routine, but historical interrogation practices in the 20th century, early 20th century in America, as well as routine interrogation in the 90s. Most of my work on social psychology of interrogation was after my doctoral dissertation, but that's about part of it. Question: and as part of your doctoral dissertation, did you conduct field research during which you observed actual police interrogations? Answer: I did. The Oakland Police Department in Northern California, which is very close to Berkeley, where I was receiving my doctorate, allowed me to I ended sitting in for 9 months. That ultimately 102 interrogations, live interrogations as they occurred. And then 2 other police departments in the Bay Area that were smaller, Hayward and Vallejo. Each gave me 30 fully videotaped interrogations, which was less common at the time. So 182 interrogations I observed either live or by recording. Question: and is that experience, being able to actually observe interrogations as they happen, an experience that sets you apart from other experts in the field? Answer: I think observing the interrogations live does set me apart, especially in the early 90s. Now that electronic recording has become more widespread, of course, other experts have access to those tapes. Usually, but to my knowledge, very few experts have had access to actual live interrogations. And just so we're clear, when you observed these interrogations, were you actually in the room, or were you monitoring them from another location? No, I was in the room. I was trying to be as unobtrusive as possible and not have any effect on the actual process, although it was up to the interrogator whether to introduce me or not. Now, after your dissertation, have you continued to study and research the social psychology of police interrogations by viewing actual videotapes of police interrogations and confessions? Answer: yes, and audio tapes, case files, and other related materials. Can you estimate how many such interrogations you've reviewed in your career? Answer: well, I'd estimate that I've studied probably 3,000 or more interrogations at this point. Not all of them have been recorded interrogations, though I would venture at this point most of them have been. In the earlier years, most were not recorded, but that's changed. Question. Have you and other scholars from the social sciences been able to empirically study the workings of the effects of these psychological interrogation techniques? Answer, yes. Question. And how have these studies been conducted? And there are 5 methodologies that social scientists use. The first, which you've alluded to, would be field observation, studying something in its natural context. I've relied on that method, obviously. I've also relied on another method which involves interviews of the participants. Social scientists have also studied documentary materials. I mentioned doing historical analysis. But I've also studied contemporary materials, case files, which often contain data or information relevant to the effects of the techniques. And then there are experiments that social scientists have done, and in this area, as well as surveys that can also get the effects of these techniques. You've performed some of this research in these areas, correct? Answer, correct. Question, you've done observational studies? Answer, correct. You've done some experimental research? Answer, yes. You've obviously analysed actual cases of false confessions? Correct. You've done documentary analysis of case files? Yes. You've reviewed, and you pretty much the extent of the literature of other scholars as well. Yes. This has been the focus of my research career for 2 decades. And aside from your work, how large would you say is the body of work dealing with the social psychology of police interrogations? So I would say at this point the body is quite large. There are hundreds of articles, dozens of books, edited books, and so it's quite extensive, going back many years. Do these studies in this book body of work discuss the risks that attend to psychologically coercive interrogations? Much of it does, yes. Question, and what risks? Well, the risks would be that somebody could be induced through psychological interrogation techniques or coerced into giving an involuntary statement, a statement against their will, and that they could be induced or coerced into giving a false statement, a false confession in particular, and that these kinds of statements and admissions and confessions, if involuntary and or false, could lead to the wrongful conviction of the innocent, and perhaps even the over-conviction of the guilty. Question. Let's talk about your study and your work in the area of unreliable confessions. Have you also done research on the subject of unreliable confessions? Yes. Can you describe when did you begin to study that subject area? Well, I began to study the subject of unreliable or false confessions in the early 1990s. At first began to write about it in the early 1990s. And of the unreliable confessions you have studied, are we talking about actual cases of unreliable confessions? Answer, yes. So I've studied many cases of actual unreliable or false confessions. I've done individuals case studies. I've done aggregated case studies, yes. Question, and amongst the unreliable confessions that you've studied, some of them were called proven false confessions, correct? Answer, correct. Question, and what do you mean by a proven false confession? Answer, well, it's very difficult to prove a confession false because you have to prove the negative. And strictly speaking, that's impossible to do. So what we in the field have tried to do, figure out how can you say when you're doing research on confession cases that a confession is false or near to absolute certainty. And there are four ways you can talk about. There are four ways you can prove a confession false or to that standard. And so we describe those as proven false confessions. One, if you could show it was physically impossible for the crime, for the person to have committed the crime. Let's say they were in, I'm sorry, you were going to give an example of what that means. I didn't mean to, no, I'll be very brief. That they were in jail at the time. So let's say they were in jail at the time. Two, if you could show that the crime did not occur. Say the murder victim showed up alive. Three, and this is more common these days, if there's scientific evidence that exonerates dispositively. And then four, if the true perpetrator is identified and everyone agrees. That's the true perpetrator. Okay, would it be fair to say that you have analysed and documented more cases of proven false confessions than any other expert in the field? Answer, yes, along with my co-authors, yes. Okay. Know approximately how many proven false confessions you've analysed? Answer, I would say between 200 and 300 that I've personally analysed. Okay. And they're also unreliable confessions that fall short of this proven standard, correct? Yep, correct. And you've developed categorization for those kinds of confessions as well. Answer, yes. We call these highly probable false confessions. The four situations that I mentioned, you could be innocent and have falsely confessed and still not be able to prove your confessions false because the crime did occur. The true perpetrator has not been apprehended and it was not physically impossible. Maybe you were with your friend and no one's believing that alibi. And there's simply no scientific evidence. Some crimes, many crimes, don't leave behind scientific evidence. So we talk about highly probable false confessions, when in our analysis, the weight of the evidence overwhelmingly supports that the confession is false and there's no good evidence that it's reliable or true. A lesser standard. Question. So for the purposes of this examination, if you're comfortable with this, when I refer to proven false confessions, I'm going to be talking about those pristine confessions where those four kinds of proof were presented. And when I talk about unreliable confessions, I'm going to talk about all the other types of unreliable confessions. Okay. Question. Now, you've been a prolific scholar. Have you any books based on your research and study of police interrogations and unreliable confessions? Answer, I have. Question. And how many books have you written, Dr. Leo? Answer, several books. One, the primary book is the book that I see there, Police Interrogation and American Justice, which is about the history, psychology and policy and legal issues related to police interrogation and false confessions, published 2008 and soon to be nearly finished by me. I've also edited a book on Miranda issues related to Miranda, which is the psychology of interrogations and false confessions. And I've written a case study of a multiple false confession case in Norfolk, Virginia. Okay, and have any of your books received any awards? Yes. Which books? The Police Interrogation and American Justice book has received multiple awards this year and, well, last year and the year before. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of your law review articles and your psychological articles, but of all the articles and book chapters that you have written, which do you consider to be the most noteworthy in the field? Put him on the spot a bit there, Steve. Well, it's a hard question to answer. And really, maybe it's not really for Richard Leo to answer, it's for other people to answer. When you've got Mark Gotti writing a review of your book, then you know that it's a pretty weighty piece of work. Okay. The work that I've done with Richard Ofshe, who's a retired professor at Berkeley and also a social psychologist, trying to analyze the interrogation process and how the techniques break suspects down and lead to the decision to confess, I think is among the most noteworthy in terms of understanding the process through which interrogation leads to false confession, as well as the work that I've done with him on, and others, on the problem of contamination and separating reliable and unreliable confessions. One other article with him in particular. Come on, Richard, don't be bashful. You could mention yours and Steve's article together, which was, I think it was in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, how much of the work that you've done and published has been submitted to the rigors of a peer review process? Well, I would say probably 2/3 to 3/4. I am an interdisciplinary scholar, so I'm primarily a social scientist. My primary study, published in social science journals that go through the rigors of peer review, but I'm also a legal scholar and a law professor, so much of my work is also published in law reviews, which typically have a lesser form of peer review, though not always. Some law reviews, like the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology, where I've published a number of articles, has a peer review process. Question: and are you also a peer reviewer yourself? Answer: yes. Question: and that is an honour in the field to be considered a peer reviewer? It is. I guess after I think about it, it is. Okay. A lot of tedious work sometimes, but yes, it is an honour. Has the work that you've done, your books, your articles, been cited in courts in the United States of America? Answer: yes. Question: has it been cited by Wisconsin courts? Answer: it has. Off the top of my head, yes, it has. Okay. And was it cited in the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the Jarrell J. case? Answer: yes. Okay. And has your work been cited by the United States Supreme Court? Yes. And how many times that you're aware of? I'm aware of 2 times. Okay. And one would be Corley versus United States in 2009. Yes. Would you please spell that? Yes, I could spell that. T-H-A-T. Corley, C-O-R-L-E-Y. And what was the second one, Dr. Leo? Missouri versus Siebert in 2004, I believe. That's S-E-I-B-E-R-T, correct? Correct. Have you ever attended a police training? Yes. And can you discuss some of those that you've attended? Answer: when I was a graduate student doing my doctoral dissertation research, I attended 5 interrogation training courses. The first was put on in-house by the Oakland Police Department in Northern California. The second and the third were the courses by the Reed and Associates interrogation training firm in Chicago. They are the leading firm. They travel the country. And at that time, and I believe still today, put on a 3-day introductory interrogation course for detectives and police officers and law enforcement officials, public and private. I believe they do a 4-day course in the Chicago area, but when they travel, it's a 3-day course. So I attended that and participated in that, and then I also attended and participated in a 2-day advanced interrogation training course that Reed and Associates also does across the United States. And after that, I attended and participated in a 5-day introductory interrogation training course in Northern California at the San Mateo County Community College. It's basically for detectives in the Bay Area who had been promoted from patrol to get them up to speed on interrogation practices and getting confessions. And then finally, the 5th and final one I attended was put on by the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glynn County, Georgia. That was an advanced interrogation training course. It was by invitation that I was allowed to attend and participate. That's where, at the time, and I believe still, this is still true today, all federal police were trained, with the exception of the FBI, who, of course, have their own training academy. Now, you mentioned the Reed interrogation training. Are you a certified Reed interrogator? Answer, yes, I am. I do have the certificate, yes. Okay, and have you ever been on the advisory committee of police departments? Answer, I have. Of one department, the Long Beach Police Department in Southern California. It's a police department that serves over a city of 2 million people, and I was on academic advisory committee from, I believe, the middle of 2001 to around the middle of 2003. This is a committee that advised the chief academics, local academics. Question, have police departments ever brought you in to train their officers? Yes. On how many occasions? 2 occasions. The first was in the summer of 2002. It was the Broward County Sheriff's Office in Fort Lauderdale. They are the second largest sheriff's department in the country, and they had me put on 3 days of training. It was the same training each day, 8 hours, to 100 different felony investigators or on interrogation and coercion and false confessions. And also the Miami Police Department 6 months later, in early 2000, had me do another one of these, basically the same 8-hour session. Okay, have you ever given testimony before legislative or executive bodies on the subjects of police interrogations and confessions? Answer, yes. Have you ever done that in the state of Wisconsin? Yes. Can you tell me when? I believe it was in 2006, and it was to the Criminal Justice Study Commission. And of course, we all know the name of the Criminal Justice Study Commission, because of course that was the original Avery Task Force. It's nearly 2:30, so I've got to crack on. That seems to be a pretty good place to end there. In 2006, he gave testimony to the Avery Task Force. Well, okay. As I say, by then it had been changed. Right, let's shut this down. So that's part one, and there is quite a lot of finding out about Richard Leo. There's really do need to know the sort of expert that we're dealing with here, I think, and so it's good to don't worry, we do get onto the nitty gritty. We do get to go through the interview of Brendan at the Mishcot High School. So anyway, we'll catch you all again soon. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Dark Side Sean, Luigi, Sharon, Susan, hi Susan, Jazz, Ian, Linda, Dark Side of the Moon, Jenny, hi, Linda, Sean, Paul, yes, Sean, Paul, Linda, yes, excellent. Thank you very much. We'll catch you all again soon. Just one thing before I forget. This, hoping obviously to get a chat with Mark Godsey. It's not this Wednesday afternoon. I put it back to this Wednesday, hoping I might hear something back from Mark Godsey. I haven't heard anything, so all I'm going to do is keep putting back a week until I've got a definite, and then I will get to that definite date and time. But I say I'm not going to delete it, because hopefully we are going to get a chance to speak to Mark Godsey in the not too distant future. Hear back from him. On a completely separate note, though, a musical note, one of my great guitar heroes, as some of you may know, is the New York guitarist Woody Mann. I've done a couple of his tunes, one on accordion, one on guitar, but he's one of my favourite guitarists. And I reached out to him recently and said, do you want to come on and have a chat about music? I've yet to ask him the two most important questions. The second most important question being, of course, have you watched Making a Murderer? And the most important question of all, what nationality is Captain Crunch? Anyway, we'll catch you all again soon. Bye for now.